In the first two chapters of the paper, we've talked about who we want to recruit and how we're going to select them. As we have said earlier, getting the right people working in the organisation is going to be one of the critical things for their success. So it's very important that we get the right people working for us. So the stage we've got to is we've selected people and they are now about to join the organisation. What we're going to move on and talk about is something that might be very close to the things that you guys are particularly interested in, because we're now going to start talking about training and development. Training and development, however you look at it, is basically a cost for the organisation. So what an organisation has to do is to make sure that its training and its development is cost effective and is also adding to what the organisation is able to achieve. So if, for example, I own a company and I spend $500,000 on training all my staff, that is simply a cost unless the benefits to the organisation are going to be bigger than $500,000. Maybe they'll be able to keep customers happy. Maybe they will be able to come up with new ideas. Maybe they'll be able to work faster. But training and development is one of the biggest costs that organisations face, so they have to make sure they are spending the money wisely. Why is it particularly important? As an accountant, one of the reasons why training and development is so important to you is because it's a very easy cost to work out how much we're spending, but it's very difficult to work out the monetary value of the benefit that we're getting. So it's easy to see how much we're spending, difficult to work out how much it's benefiting the entire organisation. And yet, if we don't work out what the benefits are, then potentially we could easily cut the spending on training. It's one of these things where if a company has problems with its finances, often training and development is one of the early costs that a company looks to cut back on. Again, because it's easy to see the cost saving, it's not so easy to see what the benefit was going to be. So it's important in Chapter 3 that we think about the training and development. We'll be thinking about it from 2 points of view. The one that potentially is of more interest to you at the moment is what's the effect on the person who is getting trained. Most of you who are working for organisations, you are being trained by them. So what's the benefit to you? But the other way to think about training and development, to think about Chapter 3, is when you are a manager, when you are in charge of other people, what will you need to train them to do? How will you train them in the skills that they need? So training and development is something that you will see throughout your working life, either being the person who's receiving the training or later on being the person who has to decide what the training is going to be for everybody else. So, first of all, let's start by just making sure that we're clear with the difference between training and development. If you remember in the introduction, I talked about the fact that there is technical language that we use in paper F1. We saw that when we talked about recruitment and selection. To most people, recruitment and selection would be the same thing. If I talk to most people about recruitment, they think that includes not only deciding on what kind of candidate we want, but also choosing the right person. Back in Chapter 1, we said that those were two different things. One is recruitment, and a separate one is selection. Same thing here. If you talk to most people about training and development, they will say it's the same thing. And it's not. The differences are fairly minor. For our purposes, most of the things that we say about training will also be true of development, but technically they are slightly different things. So training is basically something that you need to give somebody to carry out their present job. So you would train a worker, how do they operate a new computer system? If you've changed the computer system in work, You would train a worker, this is how we want you to carry out these particular tasks when they first join the department. So training is basically, you can't do your job without having gone through this. So it's carrying out their present job, it's often technical, and you can see it's usually given by a superior. It might well be one person sitting down with a junior member of staff and saying, this is a task that I've given you, this is how you do it. Now, as an example of that, when I became an accountant, I trained with one of the big 4 accountancy firms. I trained as an auditor. And so pretty much the very first thing that we did after we had joined the company was we spent 2 weeks on a course learning how to do double entry bookkeeping. So we spent 2 weeks intensive doing what you do in paper F3. And then we were back in the office probably for no more than 2 or 3 days, and we got sent on another course that actually told us how to start doing the work that we had to do out at clients. How do you prepare an audit paper? Why do you do things in a particular way? Now, both of those are examples of training. You needed them to be able to actually do the job. So one of the things that I did as a very early recruit was I had to start looking at auditing things like the cash that an organisation had. So I had to be told, the firm that I worked for, what was their approach to auditing the cash? What kind of tests did they do? What kind of way did the things have to be written up? So how were the tests performed? How were the tests recorded? How was everything checked? How were all the bits and pieces of paper filled out? Training, technical. It wouldn't have meant any course on bookkeeping, so I actually knew what I was looking for. There are other kinds of training that we went through. Basic things like, how do you fill out a timesheet? Basic things like, how do you fill out an expense form? These are also still training because they're immediate things that you need to do just to get going working for the organisation. So all of us working for companies have been through training courses, because in effect the training courses, if you don't receive this training, you cannot actually do your job. Now, what kinds of circumstances do you need training? When you are new to an organisation. So it could well be it's your first ever job, and so you're just new to working. You need to be trained how to carry out basic tasks. It could be, how are things done in this particular organisation? So I trained with one of the big 4 accountancy firms. If I had moved after a year or two to another of the big firms, they would have done things in a slightly different way, and I would have needed to have been trained in how that particular organisation did them. The other time that you need training is where something changes, and in that particular situation, everybody in the organisation will need training. So, for example, the big accountancy firm, if it decided to put in a new computer system, everybody, regardless of if they'd just started or if they'd been there for 20 years, everybody would have needed to go through the training again, because without it they wouldn't have been able to do their jobs. So there are some kinds of training that you receive because you're new to a job or because you're new to a particular company. There are other kinds of training you receive when an organisation decides to change something. And finally, there might be kinds of training that you are forced to have. The obvious one, if you are an accountant, would be looking at something like, what happens when there is a new accounting standard that's brought in? All auditors need to know what it is so that they can check that accounts have been prepared in the right way. What happens when the tax rules change? All accountants who prepare tax for a company or for people need to know what new rules are so that they prepare the tax returns in the correct way. So some training is forced on you. The key thing behind all training is it's immediate. You need this to be able to do your job today. Now, training, I said earlier, training is a cost. At least as far as training costs are concerned, most managers can understand them, because they appreciate that without these training costs, the work cannot get done. If I don't know how to do my job, then I cannot obviously do it. So training is worth spending the money on. The bit where we run into difficulties is what's called development. Because development, you are giving somebody skills that they may use in the future. Notice that word there, that they may use. Now, development is also very, very important for reasons that we will see in a little while. But the key problem as an accountant is you are spending money today on something that the person who is receiving the development may never actually use. Again, when I was working at this Big Four accounting firm, I remember going on a week-long course about how to negotiate with clients. I had just finished my final exams and I'd got the results, so I was qualified. The idea that my company were thinking was that in a year or two I would be a manager. I would then have to go out and negotiate with clients for things like fees. So they sent me on a week-long course, which was very, very enjoyable, except for the fact that I then handed my notice in about 2 weeks later, and I left the firm, and I have never, ever put those skills into use. So I got paid to do a week's course in something that I still haven't used 20 years later. So, to be honest, that one was a waste of money. So the big problem with development is it's something that may be used in the future. So it may be very helpful, or it may be a complete waste of money. It says it's often concerned with soft skills. Soft skills are the ones that relate to things like dealing with people. Not technical skills. Technical skills, how do you do a tax return? How do you apply International Accounting Standard 13? I don't even know if there is an International Accounting Standard 13. But technical skills, how do you do something? Soft skills, much more to do with people. So again, it's difficult to work out what the benefits of those things are. And finally, it says their development is the responsibility of everyone in the organisation. So it could be a work colleague who tells me how to do something that will improve my performance. It could be my boss. It could be somebody in another part of the organisation who shows me a trick to doing something that will make my life a little bit easier, that will make things go a little bit faster. So training tends to be your boss. I've given you a task, let me show you how to carry it out. Development, on the other hand, could be anybody inside the organisation. Now, it's very important just to realise at this point that although I've talked about training costs, development costs, I don't necessarily mean the cost of sending somebody on a course. That's what most people would talk about with a training cost. Because we are studying, we think about the cost of doing a course, whether it's going to a college, whether it's watching something that's a video presentation. There is a cost to it because you've got to buy something and pay for it. Now, there are a lot of training costs in an organisation that are like that. You send somebody on a course. You get an outside lecturer to come in and give a talk about something. But even things inside the organisation still have a cost. If my boss sits down with me and spends an hour training me how to carry out a particular task, there is still a cost, because that is 1 hour of my manager's time that they cannot spend doing something else. So there is a cost even if you're doing this as part of the workplace. So training and development, very, very important. So we have to make sure we spend the money wisely. So we've got, first of all, various benefits behind both training and development. First of all, let's think about how training benefits the entire organisation. So how it benefits the company that are paying for the training. Well, the most obvious one is staff will have more skills. You may have come across the idea of people being multi-skilled. What does that mean? It means that a person can do more than one job. Why does that help an organisation? If the person who regularly does the job is away sick or absent for whatever reason, somebody else can step in and do the job and the organisation can carry on. So giving people lots of skills means that they can cover for each other. It would also, of course, mean that if the organisation was to get particularly busy in one particular area, they'd be able to have more people who could be able to do the work that was necessary. A good example would be something like an accountancy firm preparing individuals' tax returns, not company ones, but individuals' ones. Now, obviously, it's different in every country, but in the UK, tax specialists tend to get very busy in December and January, because the end of January is the last date when people can file a tax return, which may well mean that the work of the tax department is perhaps relatively quiet for most of the year, and then come January, it suddenly goes up. Now, how can you cope with that extra rise in demand? One way is to have all your tax specialists working lots of overtime, but of course all that will happen is they will get tired. So another possibility would be if you had people who could come in and do tax returns. They were skilled enough, maybe not to do all of it, but to do the basic things. Get them to do the basic stuff, and that way you ease the workload of everybody. When the tax return season is over in February and March, then all those people return to what they normally do. So multi-skilling avoids the problem of people being ill, and it also can try and smooth out the work. If it is going to go up, you get more people to do the work and to help out. And then when the work slows down, those people can return to their other tasks. So that might benefit an organisation. You've also got the fact that if people are trained, they can have more work delegated to them. So delegation is something we'll see later on in the course. But if I am a boss, I have two choices. Either I do the work myself, or I get you to do it. If I train you, I will be able to get you to do more of the work, hopefully freeing my time up so that I can get on and do other things instead. So I can train you up so you can have more work, more interesting work delegated to you. The third, which is sort of similar, less supervision. If I tell you how to do something, I might have to stand over you and watch you doing it to make sure you don't make any mistakes. That obviously means there is nothing else that I can do with my time. So if I train you properly, you can get on and do the things on your own. Again, I can go off and do something more useful. Work should be a better quality. Hopefully, if I've trained you, the work will be better quality, which hopefully means that we will save money. We will save money because customers won't return things to us that are faulty. We will also save money because we won't have to fix as many items. So you might spend money on training and save it back again because you don't have to spend as much time repairing things that are broken. And finally in here, customer service should be improved. If you train staff to be more knowledgeable about the company, then they will be able to deal with more inquiries that customers have. All of us, no doubt, have been in a situation where you speak to somebody in the company and say, please tell me about this, please tell me why this is happening, please give me some information. And the person you're speaking to basically says, I will have to go and ask somebody because I don't know about that. Now, if that happens once or twice, you might not be too annoyed about it. But if that happens 6 or 7 times, the person you speak to has to keep going and finding out, then you would not be very impressed with the company. So customer service can be improved because the person you are speaking to knows more about how the company works. So training is a cost, but it can give us a benefit because we can look after our customers better. Now, those are all benefits for the company. But there are also, of course, benefits for the person who is receiving the training, benefits for the individual. You can see that the work should be more interesting. If I have been trained, I usually will be able to get more variety of work, and I also will probably get slightly harder, more involving, more interesting tasks to do. So instead of just doing very boring stuff all the time, I can be given more interesting things to do. That in itself is a big benefit to the individual. Underneath that, higher self-esteem. If my manager thinks that I am good enough to receive some training so that I can do my job even better, or if my manager thinks that I'm good enough that I could now do something different to what I've been doing in the past, something harder, more challenging, that is going to make me feel better about myself. It's going to improve my self-esteem. We will see later when we get to the chapter on motivation how important both of those two are. The final one down there, when you finally leave a job, you can take all these skills and transfer them somewhere else. So that one is obviously very, very good from the individual's point of view, although it's not necessarily very good from the company's point of view. They spend all this time and money training you, and you get a lot of skills which makes you more employable. It makes it easier for you to get a job, and you say, thank you very much, and I'm now off to earn my living somewhere else. So one company pays for your training, and a different company gets all the benefits from it. But, to be honest, whenever you do any training, that's sort of the risk that you have to take. So we've got training and development, very, very important, both to the individual and to the company.